And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 85. Tonight, I'm going to be looking at the Odin's Chair photograph that I did. There we go. That should be not that one. Try that one. Yes. So, Odin's Chair. This was a photo shoot I did for Dumfries and Galloway Life magazine in response to the Galloway Hoard, which Viking hoard of treasure which was found in the region. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that photo shoot I did for it. Also, I'm going to be looking at a few images that were sent in for critique, which may well involve a few smug points, I think. Some kind of interesting photos. So I'll be chatting about them a little bit later. In the meantime, here we are, live on YouTube. Yes, and if you're here, stick in a comment, let me know you're here, say where you're from if you've not joined us before. I can see there's a few comments in already, come and check those in a moment. And if you would like to support these podcasts, if you find them useful, entertaining, you feel like you're gaining something from coming back and watching them each time, then do consider supporting me via buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. So yeah, here we are. Episode 85. So, okay, so you've got a few comments in. Let's take a quick look. Pat says, hi everybody from a chilly Somerset. Roy says, greeting all from Yorkshire. Maggie, my wife, says, good evening from our Castle Douglas kitchen, which is just the other side of that wall. Ben says, hello from Edinburgh. April says, hello from Merrick, New York. Rosemary says, hello from Western Washington, USA. Jim says, hi everyone from Dumfries. Meg, that's my daughter, says, evening everyone from Castle Douglas from down in the living room, which is basically diagonally down at that angle from where I'm sitting. Sandra says, hello everyone from Birmingham. Garry says, hello from the High Peak district in England. Brian says, hi all from Dumfries. Stacey says, good afternoon all from a sunny cold day in Hatboro, Pennsylvania. Thanksgiving is only 2 days away, so to all have a blessed day. So that's great. So we have people in tonight, we have photos to talk about, we have images put in for critique, so we're here. Episode 85. Right, now, okay, so let's move on and let's talk about the Odin's Chair photo. Now, essentially what happened is it starts off, if you go back, I think it's 7 years, so 2014, there was, somebody was out with a metal detector hunting for stuff, and they came across a Viking hoard, the likes of which hadn't been seen before. It's reckoned to be one of the richest Viking hoards found in Britain and Ireland. And so then there was all sorts of bits and pieces going on about, I think, raising funds to try and keep it in Scotland. Eventually the National Museums of Scotland got hold of it, but then of course everything was shipped up to Edinburgh and pretty much hasn't been seen down in this corner of the country since, even though this is where it originated. Until the Galloway Hoard exhibition came back here, I think it was about a month ago, or certainly a few weeks back, when so the Kirkcudbright Gallery, so Kirkcudbright is a town about 10 miles along the road from where I live, and the gallery exhibition space there, you can now go and see some of the items from the Galloway Hoard. So actually, I'll tell you what, let me show you a couple of the pieces. Maggie and I went there last week. Now these are just quick phone photos. They weren't wanting big cameras and certainly no flashes and anything like that. So, but I'll give you an idea of some of the bits and pieces they had. So this incredibly intricate cross with a necklace and stuff with it. That was one of them. Another one here. What was amazing, so you've got these kind of incredible intricate silver bracelets. Sorry, but also there was other things in there. There was these gold rings, this beautifully sculpted bird made out of gold. So there were all sorts of things within this hoard. It wasn't just bit of Viking silver, there was stuff that had been obviously traded from halfway around the world, and stuff that was much older, although it's reckoned that the hoard itself was buried in about 900 AD or thereabouts. Some of the stuff that, the cloths that they'd managed to carve and date, bits that were kind of kept, were from several centuries earlier as well. Here's some incredible brooches. The intricate work that's gone into them is just absolutely astonishing. Some more bits, again, gold wrapped around crystals. There was a whole thing about that. You had a lot of these sort of silver ingots as well, and some of them were just sort of straight ingots. Some of them were then made into bracelets, and actually the bracelets, a lot of these intricate silver bracelets were made with essentially a set amount of silver. So that silver was an ingot, could be made into a bracelet, and therefore you could literally carry your wealth with you. And each ingot you would know, would be of specific weight for trading. So that gives you a sort of sense of an idea of what we were, what was found. So anyway, so yes, so that was at the gallery. We went down to take a look at that. Now, one of the other things now, so where does Odin's chair come into this? In essence, what happened was there's a furniture maker called Ian Cameron Smith, or Cameron Smith Designs, which is Ian and his wife Claire, and they were approached to create something to mark the whole thing coming down, and he was commissioned to do this chair. And this chair, basically designed on Viking thrones, and it was built at 3 times size, so it's 3 times larger than it would naturally be for even a large Viking to sit in. And Ian then got his sons involved. One of his sons, also called Ian, was very heavily involved in looking up the artwork, doing carvings, finding the runes that were going to go along with it. And then his other son, Callum, was involved in creating these metal crows. So to go on them. So let me just kind of show you a couple of these. So you see, and these were in turn, likewise, I think 3 times, so not crows, ravens, I should really say. And the ravens are from Norse mythology. You have Odin is the king of Asgard, the chief of the gods, the Norse gods, from Scandinavian Viking mythology. This is where we really need Inga or Helga from Oslo. Both of them could probably tell you an awful lot about Norse mythology. Tell you certainly more than I can. But 2 of the distinctive features about Odin were, one, he only had one eye, which I think he sacrificed for knowledge, and the other is he has the 2 ravens, and the ravens are Hunin and Munin, who translate, I think, as thought and memory. So onto this chair were these sculpted, metal sculpted ravens as well. Looks like VG's here. It says, "Hi everyone from India." As you can make it, VG. And Pat's saying, "What a magnificent find! So exciting." Yeah, and it's quite incredible to go and see these designs. Realise they've been sitting under the ground for over 1,000 years. So the chair then was designed, and basically it was designed as partly a tribute to the whole idea of the Vikings and the Norse mythology, to tie in with the Galloway Hoard, but also as a place where you can go and take selfies and clamber over it and have your photo taken in it. It's, in a way, I thought it was quite clever, this idea that you create something which people will want to do all the selfies on, because as soon as you're doing the selfies, you're then shoving them onto social media. Every time you're putting it on social media, it's then spreading the advertising out around your network and possibly around the world as a place to go and visit. So this was kind of the idea behind it. So I was asked if I would sort of photograph the chair, or more specifically Ian and his sons at the chair. And part of it as well was we got a Viking involved, a guy called Adrian, who's real huge, broad, I think he's a bodybuilder, weightlifter kind of guy. And then he was lent chainmail and a helmet, and had a patch over one eye so he could kind of look sort of almost like the embodiment of Odin. And so I'd gone out, I'd met up with Ian out at the place, but he'd been chucking it down with rain when we, just a kind of, this was a sort of sense of the chair in the space on a wet, grim, grey day, where I was sort of just moving around trying to get a sense of what angle I could maybe do the shoot at. Now, to give you a couple of examples, signs here, so you can see there's carvings within it, and also these two bits here. Essentially what happened was he took a tree, one of these sort of, a nice length of tree that had been washed up on a shore, split it, cut it down in half, and then used those as the kind of primary supports at the back there. So these are the roots of a tree, and that's making reference to Yggdrasil, I think it's called, which is the world tree. So again, part of Norse mythology. You can see there's carvings, runic carvings in the side as well, and this was all part of what his son Ian was involved in creating as well for the tree. So for the chair. So we had the chair. The day that let's show you this photo. So on the actual day of the shoot, then it was a much brighter, sunnier day. By now the ravens had been added to the chair. This is just an unedited quick photo, just to give you a sense of it. And you can see the sun is coming, and it's just this corner of a building over here. This is the Stewartry Museum, which is it's only a couple of 100 yards along the road from the museum, and this is in the grounds of it. The sun was just clipping the edge of the tree, and over the next half an hour, the whole chair then kind of fell into shadow as the sun moved around. So what I did was we got let's see, this photo here gives you a sense. You can see that it's gone into shadow. So roughly where I'm standing, I then set up a flash on a stand to shoot from more or less the direction where we're viewing from here. Now the other key thing to notice, this is Ian, by the way, just doing a quick phone photo of our Viking in the chair, is the reflector I've got leaning against the tree just over there. Because that part was still in the sunlight, I was able to stick that there and bounce some of the sunlight back on here. You can see here this sort of slight orange or yellow glow here. That's coming from this, and the reflector, I put the gold side to it so it would add a slightly warmer sense of warmth to it. So let's try and find a couple more photos. So here's one of the first photos I took. So we just wanted to have that sense of a Viking standing guard over the chair, and it does give you a sense of the size of this thing. So although it does kind of look like he's sort of lit by sunlight, as we can, if you look at the shadow down at the bottom here, you can see the actual sunlight is just clipping the last corner of the plinth, and isn't, so actually all this light here is coming from the flash that I've got just slightly out of sight just over to the left here, which is hitting also lighting up some of the leaves here, which is casting some beautiful kind of shadowy leaves, leafy shadows over on the right here, catching him on the left. But if the light was coming that way, you can also see this sort of slight yellow glow on his shield. It's lighting up his face, getting the edge here of the chair, and that is all coming from that gold reflector that I've got. So by having the kind of two light system, it really kind of helps to add that sort of three-dimensionality to the whole lighting setup with this photo. Another example to show you how the difference. So this is one of the shots where we've got Adrian now sitting in the chair. He's got a patch over his eye. This is him being Odin in his throne, and this is one where the flash hasn't gone off, but what he is you can see he's lit in this sort of soft yellow light, which is that reflector bouncing the light back. And if I go to the next one, and I'll come back to that, losing losing photos. Where do we go? Yeah, here. This is one then where the flash has gone off. So you can see then the difference between flash off, flash on. But without it, you can just see how the reflectors lie. So like this, then this kind of gives us that kind of full sense, and then this allows us then that when we get up close. I mean, the other part of the problem is the fact that this chair is huge. It's 3 times the size that it should be, and so even when you end up someone as big and hefty as Adrian, he was still kind of dwarfed by it. So what I did was I've got the wide angle lens on this, and I've gone in really close, and what that does is that creates a kind of slight distance distortion, so anything in the foreground appears really big. So because his hands, for example, are closer to the camera than his head, look, I mean, these hands look absolutely huge. Now he does have big hands, but they're not bigger than his head in the way that they look here. But it does mean that because of that sort of sense of size differential, he then sort of sits more comfortably in that, and I've deliberately not got his feet dangling below, because the feet dangling below was a real problem. Here's a picture of me in the chair. This was just straight on, no fancy lighting. I think the reflector is there, sort of bouncing a little bit of light back onto me. But this gives you a sense of, this is where you really know what it feels like to be a hobbit. So I can't remember whether it was Callum or Ian now, but anyway, one of Ian's sons, I handed him the camera to sort of take a quick photo of me sitting in the chair. But that kind of gives you a better sense of actually what the scale is like. So we then took the photos. I got a couple of ones here. So this is where we've got the 4 together. So we've got Adrian there, and then we've got Ian on the right, and then Callum and the other Ian over on the left here. Feet hanging now behind, just deliberately cropped off, so you're still getting a sort of sense. But you've got all 4 of them kind of up against the tree there, the chair. I mean, this is one where I did a kind of a fuller length portrait version. You can now see that actually not only are Adrian's feet not touching the floor, but Ian over at the back here is actually half standing on on a crate to give himself a little bit of height. And then one of the main pictures for the that's back to the close-up one, and then one of the main pictures for the magazine then was this one where we've got Ian sitting here in the foreground with his sons sitting on the arms of the chair behind. And this is the one that then made its way into the magazine. So where are we? So if I flip back here, you can then see this was then the double page spread that made it in. We've got Ian and his sons there, and we've got the Viking and pictures of the thing. So of the crows. So that was the shoot, and it turned out remarkably well. I mean, in addition to the double page spread, they were really happy, and so they decided to put one of the photos on the contents page. I'm going to try and get sort of the light reflecting on it so much, but anyway, you can see that, and got that on the contents page as well. So, all in all, a good day's work, good day's editing too, to polish it up, to really give it a kind of good, strong, contrasty feel. And you're wanting that kind of sense of, you're wanting a sort of sense of, depth and energy and power, really, I suppose, coming out of that. So that gives you, let me just close down a few of these windows here, and there's lots of them open. Right. So, okay, let's see, we've got a couple of comments. VG says, oh yeah, we've got VG from India. Roy says, well, better late than never. Okay, well, basically lots of highs there. VG says, the light and shadows captured extremely well. Garry says, is there a system you use to work out the power of the flash you need to use, or do you experiment to get it right? That's a really good question. And the reality is, there's a certain amount of winging it. I suppose having used the flashes quite a lot, I generally have a reasonable starting guess as to whether I'm going to be using it full power or half power. And then basically the simplest thing is I set the light up as to what my best guess is, go click, look in the back of the camera, and I can immediately see whether it's too dark or it's too bright, and then I go in and make adjustments. And now, there are people, if you've been sort of certain ways of training, that you get a light meter. Certainly in the days before, you could look in the back of the camera to see whether it was a light meter was absolutely necessary. You couldn't wing it. You couldn't just take a guess, because you weren't going to know until you got the negatives developed whether you'd overexposed or underexposed. So you had to make sure you had the lighting absolutely right before you went click, at which point a light meter was really necessary. Now, I do still know a few people who use light meters, even though they do digital photography. By and large, I think they tend to come from, they sort of learnt while they're on analog cameras. That's how they kind of learn to do it. So they still feel happier if they're using a light meter first. But for me, to be honest, I've always found it easiest. Like I say, I take my best guess, I click, the flashes fire off, and then instantly I can see how I need to dial it down. But a lot of that just comes from experience. Quite often I don't have to make much in the way of adjustments. So hope that answers that one. April says that's great, Kim. Thank you, April. Sandra says, interesting to see how you got around the fact the chair was mostly in shade to get well lit photos that showed the detail of the chair. Yeah, and again, one of the handy things as well, I would say, is using a wide angle lens tends to give you a bigger depth of field for the same. So if you've say got a 5.6 aperture, if you're zoomed in on a big zoom lens, then actually your depth of field will be quite narrow. As you come out, as you go wider angle, that same 5.6 will give you more depth. And if you get to a really wide angle, then you get quite a bit of depth. Now, my photos, I can't remember exactly what I had it, but I probably had it on something like f8, f11, probably f11, I think, in order to make sure that I was getting the whole chair in focus. And then because I got it on wide angle as well, it really allowed all the detail to come out. I wasn't going to muck around with bokeh or soft areas. I needed to have the whole chair in sharp focus. In order to have the f11, of course, I've then got to have a relatively narrow aperture, so I did need the flash on full power to do that. And you could also see from that the reflector was bouncing quite a considerable bit of sunlight back into the thing. But you're also trying to balance out that you don't want the whole thing in shade. You're wanting enough light to be coming through to show that it is still daytime, so there is still a bit of blue in the sky. You can still see the foliage in the background. So it is a bit of a balance. You're balancing up your aperture with your power of your flash, with your shutter speed, and where and how close and how far away you're putting the lights to try and get everything in place. So yeah, a little bit of messing about, but then kind of that's what I do, and that's part of the speciality of why I'm called in, and why those photos will look better than anything anybody can do with just whipping out their phone. Whipping out your phone, you will only ever have the ambient light source, whether that's in direct sunlight or in the shadow of the building or under cloud and in the rain. What makes my photos stand out in a way that looking at them, they couldn't have been taken with the phone, is essentially that there is more than one light source. The fact that I have two light sources, I've got the flash and I've got the bounce light, is what gives it particular layers of depth and shadow that you just can't capture unless you are controlling, even sculpting the light onto the subject that you want. Yep, Jim says, very interesting going through your processes. Stacey says, very nicely done. Interesting concept to mark a historical find. Yeah, cool. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the Viking, the Odin's Chair. It was a lot of fun to do. I've known Ian for several years, so it was really nice to be able to photograph him doing that. And yeah, I remember actually, even at points where I was taking this, I was thinking, oh, this will be a fun one to show the podcast. So I hope you found that interesting. Okay, so what we're going to do now then is we'll move on to the critique section. we'll just just a quick reminder that if you find these podcasts interesting, useful, entertaining, then do consider supporting them from buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Great. So, critique. Now what we're going to do then is the critique section. The critique section, this is your opportunity to put images in to get some kind of feedback from me. If you have particular problems, if you've got particular sticking points, then send me your images, let me know what those sticking points are, and I will do my best to help. Now, we've only had 4 images put in tonight. I think this could be quite a shortish podcast. So also feel free to ask questions as well. Let's throw them into the chat if there's anything you wanted to know, either about the stuff we're talking about, or there's been a question that's been kind of bugging you all week that you really want to get off your chest to do with photography, then by all means, please leave a comment, let me know. So the critique section then, yes, this is your chance to get a bit of feedback. So we've had 4 people put in images this week, and so the first one is Vandana. So let me just flip over to here. And Vandana said, now the thing was actually Vandana put this in time for the last podcast, except the fact that we were doing the challenge last week. We're doing the book challenge. So I said to her, look, we're doing the book challenge, doesn't quite fit. Shall I roll it over to the following week? She said, yes, please. Now, Vandana had actually, the reason she missed this week, she hadn't realised, is because she'd missed the previous couple of podcasts, and actually says, hi everyone, hope all is well. I've missed 2 episodes and feel like missing something in my life. I took this picture at London Bridge and wanted to capture the high-rise buildings. I just couldn't get straight shots as the buildings were very tall, and I was not sure where to capture them from. If I went too further off, I was losing out the details. I feel black and white gives it more depth, and please critique. Well, the thing is, Vandana, I have to say, I'm seriously impressed with this photo. I think it's a really good, strong, architectural image. It's almost abstract. It's line. This is all about line. And we know what it is. We know it's buildings. We know you're looking up. What I love about this is it's all straight lines. There aren't really, apart from a couple of little wiggly bits, I'm not sure what these bits are. I don't know whether that's a bit of plant life or whether it's little like fairy lights gathered, hanging down or something. But apart from that, everything else is dead straight lines. But at the same time, there's not an absolute vertical or an absolute horizontal among them. They all kind of go off at different diagonals, which I think is absolutely brilliant. It really gives you such a sense of height, of energy, of power, of dominance. I'm just really impressed. And to be honest, I'm really not sure what you could do differently with this. The only thing is, and this might be because you put this into Facebook and so it's a lower resolution image. It does look like it could do with being a little bit sharper in places. When I kind of zoom in here, it's quite blurry. Now that might be the limitations of, if you did this on your phone, it might be the limitations of Facebook just sucking the detail out of the image by getting converted to a low resolution image. But if this was to be a higher resolution image, and so everything was just that little bit sharper, I don't think it could be faulted, to be honest. Now, there are some photos I've seen like this where you'll see a plane, an aeroplane, in the middle of this gap here. And they are almost always photoshopped in. They're done to look like, you just happen to look up and capture the plane in the perfect place. Nobody captures the plane in the perfect place. They're nearly always, well, I would probably say always, but I suppose I have to have a caveat and say nearly always, because who knows, maybe somebody's got lucky once or twice, but they're almost always photoshopped in. The problem, whilst on the one hand, because this is a fairly large gap, and on the one hand, it would kind of fill the gap a little bit. The other problem is because all the lines are kind of pointing towards it, it would then become the focus, and the picture would then be about the plane, and it wouldn't be about the buildings. In the absence of the plane sitting here, we go back to the fact that it is about line. This is absolutely about line, straight lines, diagonals, all these parallel lines, and yet, like I say, there's not a single direct vertical or a single direct horizontal amongst them. And I love it. I think it's a really, really good photo, Vandana. Like I say, the critique, the only thing I can think of really is it would have been good if it was a higher resolution photo. But if that's, if that's what you took, if that's what you've got, and certainly if you were putting this into these online competitions, if there's something on PhotoCrowd or Guru Shots which says city architecture, urban architecture, towers, black and white, straight lines, anything like that, I think this is the kind of photo that would do really well in that. So actually not a huge amount to critique on this. I think, if I'd done a competition with any of those titles, I think you would be getting smug points. So well done, Vandana. Really good image that. Got a few comments there. Maggie says lots of interesting lines and diagonals. Pat says very Hitchcock. I suppose it's that black and white and they're kind of looming over there. Yeah. April says I see a triangle in the middle. There are rectangles and circles. Good shot, Vandana. VG says lovely, Vandana. Sandra says nice dramatic photo, and Roy says great composition. Cool. Okay, so let's move on to the next photo then. So the next one is coming from Sandra, and this one is Sandra's, and Sandra says, after Tuesday's podcast where Kim said side lighting is more interesting, I thought I would have a go. I photographed this samurai helmet against 2 pieces of black cardboard. The camera settings were 1/5 of a second, f13, ISO 100. Thoughts and feedback welcome. Well, again, there's a bit here where I'm just thinking, right, let's just throw out the smug points to everybody who's entered something this week. I'm really impressed, Sandra, in the sense that you've had this idea and you've gone ahead and you've done it well. You're absolutely right. That notion of side light is helping to bring out the texture in this. Now, the only problem slightly is it is a little bit dark. If we zoom in a bit closer, we can make out more detail, and that's better. Again, perhaps the only suggestion I might make, if I open that with Photoshop, let's duplicate that layer. If I was in Camera Raw, I might maybe play with the clarity slider a little bit, which would just maybe boost the brightness a touch, take down the highlights so they don't get burnt out, and play with that clarity slider. Now at that point we've lightened up the foreground a bit, which perhaps we don't need to do. So what I might do is mask that and then put that back up to 100% and just paint that brighter, that little bit brighter back in again. So all we're really doing is just lightening that up a little bit. But again, if we're getting closer, we can see the detail within it. And what I'm really pleased with here, Sandra, is that you have taken that idea on board, is to understand that side lighting is different from front lighting. And so you've set up a little, you've set up your little kind of mini still life here, rich cushion, there's gold or brass or something there, the metal anyway. You've got 2 pieces of black card, one set against one behind and one below, so that all the attention gets drawn to the object you want it drawn to. So as a kind of a photo of, this is what you wanted to photograph, by creating the black background, having that rich material that it's sitting on, but doing the side, having the light kind of side onto it, you can see that it just really brings out the detail and the texture of the object. So again, really not huge amounts to say other than well done, have a smug point. I think what is essentially what's happened is that's what you set out to do and that's what you achieved. So I think you can feel good about that. I'm kind of not really sure what I can do to say otherwise, but beyond that, maybe just, that's me playing with the clarity slider in Photoshop. But again, you've even got to be careful about overdoing that. So in terms of what you set out to do, I think you achieved it. And I'm hoping then that what you've done is that you've learned a certain amount from doing that and how the lighting can change. And really, I think an interesting thing to try out here, if you didn't do it already, is to move the light around. Try, with the same thing, set it up, or maybe you already did this and that was the one that you found worked best. But try it in, do 6, 8, 10 different angles of the light on it and see how it changes. One other possible option here as well is to have a reflector, much like I did with the Odin's Chair, where you have the light on one side and you place a reflector, and that reflector doesn't have to be anything, like a big powerful reflector. I mean, you can get a very strong reflector by having a piece of board with a bit of tin foil or aluminium foil, baking foil over a piece of card will give you a very strong light. But even something as simple as a piece of white card just outside the image, so when the light is coming in and it hits your subject, some of that light goes past, hits the white card and bounces back, and then fills in some of the shadows as well. Now the style of that photo works very well as a single light style, but I think it would be fun to try out with a reflector and see what difference that makes. Because ultimately, Sandra, what this is about then is about you experimenting with light, which is fantastic. That's really good that you're doing that, because you can see the results that it has. Okay, cool. So what have we got here? Oh, VG says, wow, Sandra, loving it and waiting eagerly for Kim's inputs. Roy says, great composition. Pat says, colours are beautiful. VG says, feel like holding it in my hands. April says, very good side lighting, good idea. Stacey says, great photography, terrific, good composition. Rosemary says, lovely light, Sandra, lighting up the foreground, that smidgen, and that Kim did accentuates the light well, lovely. And Sandra says, thank you for the feedback. Thanks to everybody else for the lovely comments. And Sandra says, also, I kept the light source in the same place and I changed the f-stop and the timing, and this was the one that I liked best. Cool. Yep, that's another really good thing to do, is to play around with your f-stop and shutter speed and what have you, getting the balance of the amount of light that you want, right? Also try moving the light source as well. I mean, once you've found a setup, that's great. Anything you get, it's when you've got that kind of setup, once you've got the photo in the bag, so to speak, that you've got one you're happy with, that's great. But that also then frees you up to experiment and try other things while you're at it. I very often do this in photo shoots that I'm doing for, the professional photo shoots for clients and for, the first thing I will try and do is make sure we get at least one good photo in the bag. We go with the one that we were thinking of, the one that we've been planning first, and we get that version of it, and we get the best version of that we can. Once we've got that, we all breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief, and then we try experimenting. Maybe I'll move the lights around a bit, we'll swap people around, we'll do different variations on it. Sometimes the first one we did is the one that works the best. Sometimes, now everybody's a bit more relaxed, we find that we end up exploring and discovering new pictures that we never imagined when we started, and we quite often will end up with something even better. So, if you have the time, the only time we don't do that is when we're on time restrictions. But I always try and build into my photo shoots the idea that I can get the shot that I want, and there will be enough time left over to experiment afterwards. Oh, Rosemary says, thanks for the indoor shoot ideas, perfect for the winter months. April agrees. Sandra says the helmet is set up so that I can have a play with some of the things, as Kim has mentioned. Good. Oh, Stacey said I was going to ask if making a DIY reflector with aluminum. And she says aluminum because in North America, as opposed to aluminium, which we say in Britain. But yes, foil. You get very easy to just sheets of baking foil onto a piece of card or something makes a very strong, powerful reflector. Right, okay, cool. So next up then, we're going to go to Garry. And, where are we? Close that one. And there we go, Garry. Now, Garry said, I listened to your feedback last week. You see, this is it. People have been listening to me. I find this absolutely amazing and brilliant. Garry says, I listened to your feedback last week and had another go at developing a book image. And here we go. So some of you might remember that in the book challenge that we did last week, Garry sent me a set of photos of like close-ups of pages, almost macro shots, but then felt that he wasn't really getting anywhere. And so afterwards sort of then sent me another photo of a book, a hand on a book, that's sort of slightly ghostly that you can see through, which he did on a long exposure, had his hand there for half the time, then whipped it away. So you end up with a photo of the book, but with a sort of spectral hand over the top. But I told him that actually I really liked some of the ones that he was doing just with the edges of the pages of the book. And I felt that he could have fun exploring that. So he's done exactly this. He said, with this one, I tried to emphasize the age and the texture of the old book pages. Looking forward to the feedback. And again, this is another one here where I think, well, you kind of nailed it there, Garry. Smug points again. I think I really like this. Because again, what you're trying, as you say, what you're trying to do is really bring out that texture and the age of the book, and the fact that all the edges, we can see behind, it's white pages, but the aging of the outer tips of edges where it's all gone yellowy. Now I'm guessing you've probably slightly accentuated the kind of yellow blue shift here so that the edges are probably slightly more richer orangey brown than they might have been, because we also notice there's a bluish tint on the text on the inside. But that's okay, that's good, that's a good use of colour. When you get that kind of, I've talked about this before, where you kind of go for an orange blue colour shift opposition. They both kind of, the complementary colours, they highlight the other. It gives you a deeper sense of depth. If this whole book was all a sort of natural shade of sort of the varying shades of orangey brown, it wouldn't actually stand out so much. But because the tips of the pages are brown, but the text has got that slight bluish tinge to it, it just makes that aged feel so much better. So I think, again, for what you've set out to create, this is really good. I don't know, you can play with it, you can turn it sideways, you can do bent pages, all that kind of stuff, which you've also done. But if we're talking about what you've done with this page, with this book, we've got the book open, we can see some of the text, we can get all that lovely texture and detail on the edge of the pages. My only very slight little thing here is there's a little piece of hair or something looped in here, which once you've seen it, it's very difficult to unsee. Now I don't actually, on my screen at least anyway, maybe you can't see, if you're only watching this on a small tablet or a phone you won't see it, but certainly on my screen here, it kind of leaps out and keeps kind of grabbing my attention a little bit, but that can easily be forgiven. I think you've done really well here, Garry, and I think allow yourself a smug point. I'm hoping that you kind of feel that you got something out of revisiting it and getting that sense of texture and age and line, and it is semi-abstract. We know what it is, but it's going in and it's concentrating on the idea of texture and detail and age rather than necessarily the book as a whole or the text, a piece of text or something like that. So I think it's a good one. Again, so if there's any of these online competitions which is about books, pages, age, line, semi-abstract, anything like that. I can imagine it doing really quite well with that. So, well done there, Garry. I see April says that's a great book photo. She says I can smell the book, and that's pretty. Yeah, and that's kind of what you're going for. That's a sort of sign of success. Is as soon as people start invoking the idea of other senses beyond sight with a photo, when they say I can kind of feel it, I can smell it, I can almost taste the aged mustiness or something on my tongue, as you know, then you know that you're getting somewhere. You know that you're successfully communicating an idea that is going beyond just a flat two-dimensional image, and that in photography is of course what we're after. Yeah, Pat says she agrees she can always smell the book's texture as well. Garry says yes, I warmed it up in Lightroom. Yep, good, that worked. Meg says I really like the details in the book. Garry says, I noticed the hair after I sent it. Oh, and he used a macro tube for this. Okay, and that's where you can, if for those who don't actually have a macro lens, you can get tubes, which is essentially it's an expensive version of a cardboard tube. I wouldn't try and do it with a loo roll, but more or less you can. You essentially take a tube which you stick between the camera and the lens, and that sort of stretches it out. And it's a kind of homemade macro lens way of being able to really zoom in close. I'm not going to attempt to. I've never actually made one, so I'm not going to run a podcast on it. What I would say is, if anybody's really interested, just type macro tubes into YouTube and you will find there's hundreds of tutorials out there on how to do that, how you can use existing lenses but to really zoom in and get that macro effect. Right, okay, so cool. So on to final image this evening is Roy. Now Roy's photo says, hi Kim, this is for comment and critique, so let me just pull up Roy's photo. Now, Roy says, I'm very pleased with this image, but I've been disappointed that it has not done better in competitions on Guru Shots and PhotoCrowd. It was a dull day with low cloud when suddenly a gap appeared in the cloud cover and a shaft of sunlight burst through. This took me by surprise and I wasn't set up, but I could see another gap in the clouds coming up, so I was ready for it. It only lasted for a few minutes and then the sun waved goodbye. Any suggestions for improvement? Okay, it's quite a small photo here, so I'll just zoom that in a little bit. So what we've got is we've got this wishing well next to the large old oak tree and some bushes behind and the sun coming down on it. So, first of all, Roy, I commend you for noticing how the light was changing. So had you taken this in an overcast, dull light, certainly it wouldn't have had the same kind of depth to it that it's got. You just know, and part of this, the shadows of the leaves falling on it as well, and across the trunk of the tree next to it, gives it a sense of depth and texture that it wouldn't have on just a dull, behind the cloud kind of light. So the fact that you noticed the difference, you didn't have the camera set up, it was gone, but then you hung around, waited for the conditions to become right, and then took it again, smug points for you. Really good thinking, and that's again, it's a photographer's approach whereby you're thinking, what else can I do with this? What opportunities, what options are there? Now, unlike Sandra, who's doing a still life, who can then move the lighting, when you're outdoors, you can't move the lighting. So you then have to learn a certain amount of patience and learning to read the weather as well, which is what you did on this. Now, so I can understand that because of doing that, this then becomes it's a kind of slightly more special photo to you. The other thing is when you look at this photo, you are comparing it to the non-sunlight version of it, and so this looks infinitely better than that. The problem here, though, for anybody else looking at this photo is that they didn't see the dull photo to begin with, so they're not comparing it to. They've only got this to go on. and this is the trickiest thing that I think we have when we're photographers, is when we take the photo, we're aware of everything that else is going on with it. We're aware of the smells, the sounds, the mood we were in, the people that were around us, and of course the weather. And we're aware of what was happening just before the photo was taken, what happened just after the photo was taken. And all these things mean that when we look at the photo, we are taken back to that moment. And we have all this extra emotional memories and sensations that go along with the photo when we look at it. However, when somebody else looks at it, they don't have that with them. So when you talk about the idea of you put this photo into the likes of PhotoGrowd and Guru Shots, you're pleased with it, but you don't know why anybody else isn't pleased with it. The first thing is that nobody else has all the memories, and nobody else knows what you overcame in order to get this photo. Nobody else knows that it was a cloudy day, you hung around, you did your things, and you got a better photo than you would have had. As far as they're concerned, you could have turned up, it could have been sunny all day. So the next thing then is trying to kind of get a slightly more objective look at this. And what I feel is, though I know I can look at this and I can go, okay, that's a well, there's a tree, I'm taking a little bit of time to look at it to really get a sense of it. What I want to do here is I'm going to show you how, if we edit this slightly, we can make a few changes just to kind of re-emphasize particular. Let's just close Sandra's picture there. So what I'll first of all do is duplicate that layer. Let's zoom in a little bit so we can all see what we're dealing with. Now, part of the thing here is there's the white balance. It's very warm, so there's a sort of slight yellowish tinge across everything. Now, if you think about what I was just saying to Garry about his book, part of what really works well with his book is that you have a contrast. You've got the yellowish, orangey brown tinges of the tips of the pages, but there's a bluish shift of the actual pages behind it, and that allows it to stand out a bit more. So my first thought with this is what we want to do is we want to play a little bit with the white balance. So let me just show you. If I go to where are we, filter, camera raw filter, and we take the temperature balance, and we can shift it blue, we can shift it yellow, we can shift it purple, we can shift it green. Obviously we're not going to go that far, but what I want to do is I want to nudge this over into the blue a little bit. Maybe just bring the purple up a touch. Something like that. Okay. Now, if we compare this with this, it's fairly subtle, but at this point, I think we find that actually the wood of the wishing well and the tree actually stand out against the background a bit more. You see, when we've got the full yellowish kind of stuff, the difference between the colour of the wood and, say, the colour of the grass, whilst there is a difference, it's not a strong difference. Whereas when we've done that sort of blue shift, the green has sort of still stayed green, but the wood has sort of become slightly more neutral. And I think it stands out a little bit more. So let's duplicate that layer and then take it up and see what else we can do. So if we take this back into Camera Raw, and then I think the other thing that we've got here is that I think we could do with a vignette because there's quite a large chunk over on the left here of bush, which is quite bright. So if I'm going to go down into the optics here and vignette, just pull that in a little bit like that. And now you can see again, what this is doing is it's drawing our attention into the well. Now, so we've now got much more going on. So if we compare that now from the original to this, we can now see that there's much more kind of attention getting drawn to it. What I might do, let's just play with that clarity a little bit. I can't remember whether let's see whether that makes me go. You've got to be careful about not overdoing it. But if I take that clarity bar and just a touch, a little bit. So we've got a little bit more contrast than what we had. And now the other thing is I think part of the problem is, whilst this is a lovely tree, the tree being almost, is almost as much surface area, pale surface area on the tree as there is on the well. And so instead of this being about the well with a tree that happens to be next to it, the tree is vying for our attention as much as the well is. And so what I think we need to do is find a way to sort of tone down that tree. So what I'm going to do now is, let's say I take the curves and I darken down. I'm going to pull that down here, drag that down there, something like that. Now, obviously I don't want the whole picture like that. So let's change that to black, mask that in. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint back in. Change that to white. I'm going to paint this back in and darken down. Now, I've probably overdone it a little bit here. That's too dark. So I'll tell you what I will do. Let's do that at, go to 50% here. That's maybe better. And just kind of slightly darken down the areas around it, a little bit like that. Maybe even touch more again on this tree. I will flip that back over, lighten up this little bit a bit more, because I don't want that too dark. I do still want a little bit of grass and stuff. Maybe just bring out those leaves there, something like that. Maybe actually just highlight those little bit of leaves up in the corner, something like that. Okay, so if I select all that, put that together onto one final image, then what we're talking about is the final image. Then the differences between this and this. So now what we can see is what we've done is, by changing it, we've done the color shift, which allows the wood to stand out more against the greenery around it. And the other big thing is we've kind of darkened the edges and taken the emphasis away from the tree. So the tree is now in a supporting role to the well, rather than it being entirely about the well, or rather than it competing with the well, I should say. And then at this point, maybe I think even crop wise, we could just probably bring that down a little bit. I don't know that we need quite as much above. I could do something like that. And I think, there we go. So I hope that gives you some ideas, Roy, that so the main thing to remember here is, when we've got the picture, is we can love the picture because we remember all the things we had to overcome and all the other things that were going on around us at the time we took the picture, but none of those things necessarily translate. So this is always the tricky bit, which is why we have the critique section, so you can get an objective eye on it. When we looked at it with an objective eye, we found that there was a sort of overall, we needed more distinction in the colour shift between the well and its surroundings. But what we also needed to do was darken down, particularly the tree, which was the tree trunk, which was sort of competing with our attention for it. And once we do that, I think you end up with a much more balanced kind of version of the picture. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you some insights and thoughts there. Okay, a few more comments here. Where are we? Roy says, I did warm it up in Infinity, obviously overcooked it. Right, so you've warmed it, making it sort of slightly yellower, but what you haven't had is the contrast, and that's the bit, is you can warm it, but you also need to cool the shadows, say. If you're going to warm the highlights, cool the shadows down. Try that. April says, I would like to see this photo in black and white. It would give it an antique-y look. I think, actually, though, to be honest, well, okay, let's show you that then. If we go back to here, if we go back to the original, and let's just do a very quick gradient map. Sorry, should have, yeah. So we give it a quick, and I think this is from the original one. I think the problem is actually it's kind of too busy. You need that contrast between the well and the background. So if we go to this version of it and then turn it, it's maybe slightly better, but there is a kind of a problem that I think the black and white, because it's so busy, because there's so much detail, not just in the leaves, but these branches behind. You've got all these sticks and branches and bits of sky through there. So it's a very, very busy background that actually, when you take the colour out of it, or even just a straightforward desaturate maybe would help a little bit more. But it's still kind of too busy. It starts to fall into the background a bit too much. You're looking for ways to make the well stand out from the background, so that it's neither competing with the tree nor is it competing with the background. And because the background is a very busy background, I don't think the black and white works quite as well. I think you essentially need to do the color shift, which is what I did here, to make it stand out. So you're using a mixture of light and dark, but you're also using the color to help separate out, so that our eye gets drawn to the bit we want it drawn to, rather than it being pulled in all directions. So I hope that makes sense. April says vignette looks great. Sandra likes the vignette, thinks it makes quite a difference. Rosemary says, I like how the edit denotes the tree into a supporting actor and lets the well shine. Nice. Yeah, and again, it's an important thing to remember, I think, that when you're looking at the overall photo, what's the key thing with the photo? What's your key subject? Is there a single subject, or is there a relationship between more than one subject? In which case, how is the light and the line and the colour affecting that relationship? But in this case, it was really about the well, not about the tree, and so the tree became too dominant. So you're looking for ways to, yes, put it back into a supporting role rather than a main one. VG says the difficulty of capturing trees, different coloured layers will bring about depth, Kim said. Pat says, just to warn you, I think the little mannequin is making a bid for freedom. Yep, this is what she's talking. Yeah, Pat, you tend to notice the mannequin. I don't think most people don't. Every single week I chop and change and I move it into a different position. This time it's legs going wild. Well spotted there. Smug points for you, Pat. VG says the vignette makes a good difference, and also if the weather holds, planning a visit to Hill Station for the first week in December, waiting for this break. I will try to shoot the trees then. April said, never thought of that. Roy says, lots of good advice, Kim, thank you. And VG says, well, it's beautiful. Does it have a pulley to draw water? That could be a nice subject too. I don't know whether that was that a real well, or was it just a folly? Was it just decorative there for the place? Right, okay, that pretty much brings us to the end of this podcast. If you found this useful, interesting, you feel you've learned something from it, you would like to support these podcasts, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is a way you can do it. Next week, I haven't fully decided yet exactly what I'm going to be talking about, but there will be a critique section. So for those of you who want to get some feedback on your images, if you try out some lighting, you try out some techniques that maybe not working quite so well, you come across any sticking points, send me the images and we will do. I'll try and give you as much good feedback as I possibly can. Oh, I see. Roy says no. The well wasn't real, VG. Okay, so it was just a pretend one. There for the prettiness. Yeah. Okay. So yes. So next week then, send me in your images for critique. Advance warning. I will talk more about this next week, but I'm going to be doing some fairly radical change with the timing of these podcasts. I'm going to shift it. I'm going to be shifting them to a different day at a different time. I will give you more information on that next week, but just something to just planting a few seeds there. So I think that's us. Thank you very much to Vandana, Sandra, Roy and Garry for sending in images for us to critique, and look forward to seeing you all next week. Hope you have a good weekend. Cheerio. Right. Oh, okay, well, I'll say cheerio, but need to get that bit sorted first. Okay, now I'll say cheerio. Bye-bye.